I swear, at first glance, everything seemed perfectly fine until it wasn't. Clara and I had been married for 6 years. As an architect, my work schedule can be quite demanding, but we always managed to keep our connection alive, or so I thought. That was until I began to notice subtle changes. She'd stay out late. Her phone seemed permanently attached to her hand, and there were texts that made her smile. Yet when I asked about them, she'd brush it off with a casual, "Just work stuff. Babe, you know that instinctive feeling that alerts you when something's wrong?" It hit me hard, but I kept dismissing it, convincing myself I was just being paranoid. Then it all changed. I can recall it vividly. Standing by the window, sipping a beer after a grueling day. That's when I spotted Ethan, her coworker, pulling up in front of our house. With that smug smile of his, he leaned out the window while Clara leaned in. They kissed. Not a quick peck on the cheek, but a full-on kiss on the lips. I was frozen in place, bottle in hand, grappling with the shocking reality of what my eyes were witnessing. Initially, I tried to brush it off as nothing significant. Maybe that's just their office culture, I murmured to myself. But deep down, I knew better. That wasn't an innocent goodbye kiss. Something was definitely going on. The woman I thought I knew was fading away, and I felt utterly helpless. Played havoc with my mind. One moment, I'd convinced myself I was overreacting. The next, I'd be certain she was hiding something monumental. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. How on earth do you approach your wife and ask, "Hey, did you happen to kiss Ethan today?" without sounding completely insane? That's when I reached out to Lila, her stepsister. Lila and Clara have always had a close bond, but I got along with her too. She's sharp, no nonsense, and has always stood by me when things got rocky with Clara. If anyone could help me unravel this mess, it was her. So I called her up. "Lila, something's definitely off with Clara," I said, pacing in my living room with my phone pressed to my ear. I could hear her lighting a cigarette on the other end. "She's been acting really strange lately, working late, glued to her phone, and, I hesitated. "I saw her kiss Ethan." Without skipping a beat, she responded, "You saw what?" I spilled everything. The late nights, the mysterious text messages, and how I'd witnessed Clara kissing that arrogant jerk right outside our house. Lila fell silent for a moment, and I could hear her exhaling a long cloud of smoke. "Listen, Jordan," she said, her voice low. "You're not losing your mind. I've noticed it too. She's been distant even with me. Something's definitely off." That was the reassurance I needed. It wasn't just in my imagination. I wasn't spiraling out of control. Lila offered to help me figure it all out. She suggested we keep an eye on Clara to see what she was really up to. At first, I wasn't sure if stalking my wife was the right thing to do. It felt sneaky, almost desperate. But what choice did I have? I needed to uncover the truth. Surprisingly, Lila was enthusiastic about the plan. "We'll be smart about this," she said. "Just a couple of days. See where she goes and who she's with. No harm in that, right?" I could tell she was relishing the idea of catching Clara in the act, but I wasn't sure if it was out of concern for me or her own unresolved issues with her sister. Regardless, I needed her help, and she was ready to provide it. The first day of tailing Clara was nerve-wracking. We parked across the street from her office, waiting to see if Ethan would appear. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel, and I couldn't stay still. Lila sat beside me, completely unfazed, scrolling through her phone. "Relax, Jordan," she said, smirking. "You look like you're about to have a heart attack. How can you be so calm?" I replied, wiping my palms on my jeans. "Because this is how you find out the truth," she answered pragmatically. "If she's cheating, it's better to discover it now than later." That was easier said than done. Each time the office door swung open, my heart raced. Then, finally, there they were, Clara and Ethan, emerging together, laughing like nothing else mattered. My stomach twisted as I watched them get into his car. We followed at a distance, my mind spinning with every possible scenario. Was I overreacting? Was this merely an innocent office friendship? Or was my wife betraying me in ways I couldn't even fathom? Lila kept me focused. Don't jump to conclusions, she advised. We need solid proof, not just hunches. Easier for her to say. She wasn't the one witnessing the slow-motion collapse of her marriage. We trailed them to a small cafe across town. They settled by the window, heads close together, speaking in hushed tones. From our parked spot, it was impossible to hear their conversation, but I didn't need to. The way they gazed at each other spoke volumes. It was intimate, far too intimate. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly it hurt my jaw. Lila placed a comforting hand on my arm. Hey, we'll sort this out, she said softly. No matter what, you're not alone in this. I nodded, but inside, I felt like I was shattering. The woman I loved, the woman I had pledged my life to, was slipping away right before my eyes, and all I could do was watch. When we finally decided to call it a day, Lila suggested we unwind at her apartment. I wasn't ready to go home. Not yet, so I agreed. We sank into her couch, shared a bottle of wine, and tried to untangle the mess. Lila turned out to be surprisingly easy to talk to. She admitted she'd always felt overshadowed by Clara, as if no matter what she did, Clara always had the upper hand. Funny how life works out, isn't it? She said, swirling her wine. Looks like Clara isn't as perfect as she seemed. We chuckled, but it was a bitter kind of laughter. The kind you share when you realize your world is crumbling and there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. That night, as I lay on Lila's couch, I couldn't shake the ominous feeling that my life was on the brink of a drastic change. The worst part? I was uncertain if I was ready to face it. The following days turned into a blur of coffee-fueled stakeouts and sleepless nights. I was running solely on adrenaline, desperate to catch Clara in the act. Lila was right by my side, calm and composed, while I struggled to keep myself together. We spent countless hours tailing Clara and Ethan, parking at a safe distance, watching them meet in places that felt like daggers to my heart. Cafes, restaurants, bars. I had never envisioned myself in such a situation, but here I was, playing detective in my own life, with Lila as my unwilling accomplice. Then it happened. One night, we trailed them to a dimly lit restaurant on the outskirts of town. From our vantage point, I watched as Clara reached across the table, her fingers lightly brushing Ethan's hand. They leaned in close, talking softly, their faces too intimate for my comfort. My throat went dry as I witnessed them kiss. Again. But this time, it was far from a casual goodbye. It was a kiss that conveyed everything without uttering a single word. It was slow, deliberate, and incredibly intimate. My stomach churned. There it was, laid out before me, no more guessing, no more doubt. She was cheating. I sat there frozen, my grip tightening around the steering wheel as if it were my lifeline. Lila remained silent. She didn't need to say anything. Her hand rested gently on my arm, grounding me in that moment, but it did little to soothe the deep ache spreading through my chest. I'm sorry, Jordan, she whispered, almost as if she were taking responsibility for Clara's betrayal. I couldn't bear it anymore. Let's get out of here, I muttered. Lila nodded in agreement, and we drove away in silence, the weight of what we had just witnessed settling over us like a suffocating fog. The car ride home was quiet, punctuated only by Lila's occasional sigh or the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Clara, how we used to laugh until our sides hurt, the weekend getaways, the late-night heart-to-hearts. Now, all of those memories felt like a distant dream, overshadowed by the sight of her kissing another man. When we finally returned to Lila's apartment, I felt utterly drained, emotionally hollow. She opened a bottle of wine and handed me a glass as we sank into the comfort of her couch. We'll figure this out, she said softly, though her words felt hollow, like empty promises. I took a long sip, the alcohol burning as it slid down my throat. It wasn't supposed to be like this, I murmured, more to myself than to her. Lila leaned back, swirling her wine thoughtfully. You know, she said after a pause, I've always felt like I was living in Clara's shadow. No matter what I did, she always managed to steal the spotlight. I glanced at her, surprised by the raw vulnerability in her voice. She wasn't merely helping me out of pity. This betrayal affected her too, albeit in a different way. We weren't just grappling with Clara's infidelity. We were unearthing years of emotional baggage, unresolved resentment, and unspoken truths. Looks like we're both in deep trouble, huh? I replied with a bitter chuckle. Lila managed a sad smile, the kind that comes when you're too exhausted to cry. As we kept drinking, somewhere between the second and third glass, the tension shifted between us. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, the brush of her hand against mine. We were two broken souls reaching for each other, desperately seeking comfort and a distraction from the wreckage of our lives. Before I knew it, we were kissing, hard, messy, and filled with desperation. It wasn't premeditated, and it certainly wasn't wise, but in that moment nothing else mattered. The pain, the betrayal, the anger. It all melted away, replaced by a whirlwind of emotion I couldn't rein in. We didn't talk much afterward. We didn't need to. It was one of those nights where words felt useless, and all we had was each other. When I woke up the next morning, tangled in sheets with Lila beside me, reality crashed in like a tidal wave. My heart sank. What the hell had I done? Lila stirred, rubbing her eyes before meeting my gaze. There was no trace of regret, just a shared understanding that this wasn't how things were meant to go. "Let's not make a big deal out of this," she said, her voice groggy but steady. I nodded, relieved by her nonchalance. "Yeah, just a slip-up." We agreed to sweep it under the rug, attributing it to emotional exhaustion and too much wine. Yet, even as we promised each other to move on, a part of me knew we had crossed a line, and there would be no returning to the way things were. I left her apartment that morning with my head spinning and my heart weighed down by guilt and confusion. It wasn't just about Clara anymore. It was about the mess I'd created while trying to cope with her betrayal. And the worst part? I couldn't decide whom I was angrier with, Clara, for cheating on me, or myself, for seeking solace in the arms of her sister. As I drove home, the weight of everything pressed heavily on me. Clara had shattered our marriage, but in my attempt to piece things back together, I'd only made the situation worse. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was losing my sense of self in the chaos. And this was just the beginning. I reached a breaking point. Keeping Clara's betrayal a secret felt like swallowing poison, and I'd had enough. No way was I going to let her pretend everything was fine while I fell apart inside. I refused to be the fool in this story, not any longer. If she wanted to kiss Ethan in public and act like she could have it all, then fine. But I'd ensure everyone knew exactly what she was doing. Took me about an hour to compile all the evidence we had gathered. I scrolled through the photos of her cozying up to Ethan, laughing over coffee, holding hands across a restaurant table, and, of course, that kiss. That damn kiss that shattered everything. My hands trembled as I organized the messages, timestamps, and photos. A sick kind of adrenaline pushed me forward. I opened our mutual friends group chat, the very same one where Clara used to post pictures of our weekend trips and anniversary dinners, and hit send without a moment's hesitation. Within about 5 minutes, the chat erupted. "What the hell, Jordan? Is this for real? Holy crap, that's Clara?" Responses flooded in, a chaotic blend of shock, disgust, and disbelief. In mere moments, Clara's carefully crafted persona, the devoted wife, the reliable co-worker, was reduced to ashes. There was no turning back now. By day's end, Clara had become the talk of the town. People whispered about her behind closed doors, reached out to me for more details, and speculated on how everything had gone wrong. Word got around that Ethan, the coward, had distanced himself from her the moment he realized his career might be jeopardized. Apparently, he wasn't willing to risk his reputation for her. Left in the debris, Clara had no one to blame but herself. Then the relentless phone calls began. Clara inundated my phone with calls, repeatedly trying to reach me. When I ignored her, she resorted to texting. "Jordan, we need to talk. Why would you do this to me? You've ruined my life." With every message, my anger intensified. I hadn't ruined anything. She had. I simply ensured the truth came to light. But Clara didn't see it that way. In her twisted perspective, she was the innocent party, and I was the villain. Typical. After a few days of silence from me, she showed up at the house, pounding on the door like a woman possessed. I opened it just enough to see her, but not enough to let her cross the threshold. "You had no right," she spat, fury dancing in her eyes. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you even comprehend what you've done?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed defiantly. "Yeah, Clara. I gave you exactly what you had coming." Her face twisted in rage. "You destroyed everything. I lost Ethan, my friends. I'm left with nothing." A cold laugh escaped me, one that stemmed from sheer exhaustion. "You shattered everything the moment you chose to cheat behind my back. Don't try to put this on me." She stood there, momentarily stunned, as if expecting me to break down or apologize. Not this time. I had spent too long feeling like a fool, and I refused to give her the satisfaction of believing I regretted exposing her. That confrontation was the final nail in the coffin. There was no marriage left to salvage, and I was well aware of it. The next day, I filed for divorce, making it crystal clear in the documents. No reconciliations, no second chances. I was done. Meanwhile, Clara kept trying to reach Lila. She bombarded her with calls, left desperate voicemails, even sent flowers. But Lila wasn't having any of it. She ignored every attempt, shutting Clara out completely. Whatever bond they had before had vanished, incinerated by Clara's betrayal and everything that had followed. A few weeks later, Felix, a mutual friend who thought he could play the role of peacemaker, set up a meeting to clear the air. I only agreed because I wanted to speak my mind and walk away for good. We met at a bar, and the moment Clara saw me, the claws came out. "You think you're so self-righteous, don't you?" she hissed, leaning over the table, venom dripping from her words. "Like you're the victim in this. But you're not, Jordan. You're just a pathetic coward who couldn't handle being bored." I maintained a calm voice, though every part of me was itching to lash out. "You cheated, Clara. You don't get to rewrite the narrative to make yourself look good." She opened her mouth to retaliate, but Ethan, sitting 2 stools away, cut in. "Look, Clara," he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable. "There was nothing serious between us. It was just fun. That's all it ever was." Her complexion drained of color. "What? You knew the deal?" Ethan shrugged, like the arrogant jerk he was. "You were just looking for excitement. It wasn't supposed to mean anything." I couldn't help but smirk as I watched her unravel in real time. She had tossed aside our marriage for this? A fling with a guy who didn't even care enough to stand by her when things got tough? Pathetic. Clara shot me a venomous glare, but I remained unfazed. "This is on you," I said coolly. "Not me, not Lila, and certainly not Ethan. You made your bed, Clara." The argument ended with Clara storming out, humiliated and alone. Felix tried to smooth things over, but I waved him off. There was nothing left to discuss. I had exposed the truth, filed for divorce, and drawn my line in the sand. That night, as I sat in my empty living room, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't quite happiness, but it was close enough. Clara's betrayal no longer felt like a heavy chain around my neck. It was just a chapter in my story now. Painful chapter, yes, but not the entirety of the book. And I was ready to turn the page. A few months after the divorce papers were signed and the dust began to settle, Lila dropped a bombshell on me that hit harder than anything Clara had ever done. We were sitting in her apartment, a place that had become familiar over the past few months. I visited often, not exactly dating, but definitely not just friends either. It was complicated, to say the least. And then she dropped the news. "Jordan, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice taut, as if she'd been holding back for days. I set my coffee down. "What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, she locked her eyes onto mine. "I'm pregnant." For a moment, the world tilted. I leaned back, trying to wrap my head around her words. "Pregnant? Are you?" "Yeah," she interjected, nodding firmly. "It's yours." I won't lie, my mind short-circuited. My initial reaction was disbelief, not because I doubted her, but because the thought of becoming a father with Lila, of all people, was something I hadn't remotely prepared for. But as the shock wore off, a sense of responsibility surged within me, pushing aside all my doubts. "How are you holding up?" I asked quietly, still grappling with this overwhelming new reality. She shrugged, her face caught between fear and excitement. "Honestly,
I'm terrified.
this wasn't in my plans at all. I'm not sure I'm ready to become a mom." I didn't have the words to reassure her. I wasn't exactly brimming with parental wisdom myself. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to abandon her or this baby. I'd already suffered betrayal from someone I loved deeply, and I refused to let Lila experience that pain too. "I'm with you in this," I said firmly, hoping to convey my sincerity. "We'll tackle whatever comes together." Lila managed a small smile that seemed to ease some of her tension. "Thanks, Jordan." But the calm didn't last long. As soon as word of the pregnancy leaked, it reached Clara, and then the storm hit. It all began with a late-night phone call. I answered without checking the caller ID, and Clara's furious voice crackled through the line. "You have got to be joking," she yelled. "Lila? What were you thinking?" I inhaled deeply, trying to maintain my composure. "What I do is none of your concern, Clara." "It absolutely is. She's my sister, Jordan. You've ruined everything." A bitter laugh escaped me. "You ruined everything, Clara. You tossed it all away the moment you decided to cheat with Ethan. Don't pretend you're the victim here." Clara wasn't backing down. "She stole you from me. You owe me, Jordan. After everything we went through together, after all those years, you owe me some loyalty." Her words hit hard. Loyalty? From the woman who had set fire to our marriage without a second thought? I clenched my jaw, gripping the phone tightly. "You want to talk about loyalty? You've thrown that out the window, Clara. Not after what you did." "Unbelievable," she hissed. "You'll regret this, Jordan." I hung up before she could say anything else. Engaging with someone determined to rewrite history felt futile. From that point on, things escalated rapidly. The very next day, Clara confronted Lila, barging into her apartment without warning. I wasn't there, but Lila recounted every detail later. Clara burst in, her face flushed with rage, unleashing a torrent of accusations. "You backstabbing traitor," Clara screamed. "How could you do this to me? You stole my husband." Lila stood her ground, arms crossed defiantly. "You cheated on him, Clara. You wrecked your own life. Don't you dare blame me." Clara's expression twisted in fury. "You were supposed to be my sister. You've betrayed me in every way possible. And what about what you did to Jordan?" Lila retorted sharply. "You expect sympathy after everything you put him through? You don't get to play the victim here." Their argument escalated, voices rising and insults flying. Years of sibling rivalry, festering resentment, and betrayal spilled over. They dredged up past grievances, exposing every bitter feeling they had ever harbored toward each other. "You know what?" Lila said finally, her tone icy. "I'm done with you. Don't bother calling me, texting me, or showing up. We're finished, Clara." Clara looked stunned for a moment before storming out, slamming the door behind her with a thunderous bang. That was the last time they spoke. Any semblance of their relationship was left in ruins, utterly obliterated by betrayal. Lila tried to act unfazed by the fight, but I could see it weighed heavily on her. She carried that encounter like a hidden bruise, tender and painful. As her pregnancy progressed, anxiety began to seep in. "I don't know if I can handle this," she admitted one evening, curled up next to me on the couch. "What if I'm not ready to be a mom?" I wrapped my arm around her, drawing her close. "You're going to be just fine, and I'll be right there with you every step of the way." Lila managed a faint smile, but I could sense the fear still gnawing at her. I didn't blame her. I was scared too, but I wouldn't let her go through this alone. To ease some of the pressure, I decided to buy her a new apartment. One that was nicer, closer to the city, and spacious enough for the baby. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was my way of showing her that I was committed. We weren't just in this for the thrill anymore. This was real, and I wanted to ensure she and the baby had everything they needed. As I helped her move into the new place, I couldn't shake the feeling of how drastically my life had changed. In just a few months, I had gone from being a married man with what seemed like a stable life to a single father-to-be, entangled in a complicated relationship with my ex-wife's sister. It wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself, but it was the reality I had to embrace, and I was determined to make it work. Meanwhile, Clara was left to stew in her own bitterness, completely ostracized by everyone she once called family. And honestly, that felt like the sweetest kind of justice. Starting this new chapter with Lila felt like navigating uncharted waters. Sure, we had each other for support, but that didn't simplify matters. If anything, it made everything more complex. The whispers from Clara's family and our so-called friends began almost immediately. To them, I was the villain, the guy who left his wife for her sister. They conveniently ignored the fact that Clara was the one who had cheated. It's funny how people twist narratives when they aren't the ones living through it. You really think this relationship with Lila is going to last? One of my old friends, Jason, asked me over drinks one night. His tone was laced with skepticism, as if he were waiting for me to confess that it was all a mistake. It's not just a fling, Jason. This is my life now, I replied, sharper than I intended. If you can't accept that, then maybe we shouldn't keep hanging out. He raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, just making an observation. People are talking. People always talk. That's just the nature of things when your life turns into a drama. Clara's family completely cut me off, which wasn't a huge loss, but it still stung to see so many people more concerned with appearances than with the truth. Even some mutual friends we had known for years started to pull away, claiming our relationship was either a rebound or doomed from the start. The reality was, it wasn't just the outside pressure that weighed on us. Lila and I had our own insecurities to navigate. Sometimes, she'd cast a glance my way, her eyes probing for any hint of regret, hoping I might confess that I still loved Clara or that being with her was a mistake. I'd be lying if I said those thoughts never crossed my mind, especially during those quiet, lonely nights when the stillness magnified the weight of my past. But there was no turning back now. I had already burned that bridge, and even if I hadn't, I had no desire to rebuild it. That chapter of my life was firmly closed. Lila's pregnancy wasn't without its challenges either. Morning sickness hit her like a ton of bricks, and on many nights, I found myself holding her hair back as she fought against the nausea. She was perpetually drained, her emotions swinging from joy to despair in an instant. More than once, she curled up on the couch, tears streaming down her face, convinced that she would fail at motherhood. I can't do this, she cried one evening, clutching a pillow to her chest. What if I'm a terrible mom? What if the baby hates me? You're going to be an incredible mom, I reassured her, wrapping my arms around her. We're in this together. You've got me and we've got this. She managed a weak smile, but I could see the anxiety still lurking beneath the surface. It didn't help that our finances were tighter than I anticipated. Moving her into a better place and preparing for the baby drained my savings faster than I had planned, and my work had slowed to a crawl. We found ourselves tightening our belts. No fancy meals out, no spontaneous trips. Just bills, baby gear, and the occasional bottle of low-cost wine. To keep my sanity intact, I decided to start seeing a therapist. It felt strange at first, sitting in a quiet room, unloading my thoughts to a stranger. But I quickly realized how much I needed that outlet. I needed a space to discuss Clara's betrayal and how it still loomed over me during the quiet moments I least expected. How do you feel about your relationship with Lila? My therapist asked one session, her pen poised over her notepad. I pondered for a moment before responding. It's complicated. Some days it feels completely right. Other days, I wonder if we're just two broken people trying to piece our lives back together. She nodded, offering no judgment, just a listening ear. Gradually, through those sessions, I began to let go. Not forgiving. Clara hadn't earned that privilege, but releasing the anger that had clung to me like a persistent shadow. I was tired of carrying that burden. It didn't help anyone, least of all me. Then Clara made her final move. Out of nowhere, she called, asking to meet and discuss things. "Just one last time," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness, as if we were still in the honeymoon phase of our marriage. I knew better than to trust her, but I agreed to meet anyway. Maybe I craved closure. Maybe I just wanted to see if there was anything left of the woman I once loved. We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. She was already there when I walked in, looking immaculate and polished, as if she were trying to remind me of the person I had once fallen for. "Jordan," she said softly, her voice laced with emotion. "I miss you." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "What is it that you want, Clara?" She sighed dramatically, her eyes shimmering with faux tears. "Can't we at least try to fix this? We were good together, Jordan. We can be great again." I shook my head, feeling more weary than angry. "We can't. Too much has happened. It's over." "But I still love you," she whispered, leaning in, vulnerability etched on her face. "That doesn't matter anymore." My voice remained steady, even cold. "I've moved on. You need to do the same." For a moment, her expression crumpled, but she quickly masked it with a sardonic smile. "You'll regret this," she shot back. "Lila won't stick around. When she leaves, you'll be left all alone. Just like you deserve." I stood, tossing a few bills on the table. "Goodbye, Clara." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her behind once and for all. Lila and I both recognized that staying in the same city, surrounded by reminders of our past, wasn't an option. There were too many memories and too many people waiting for us to stumble. So we made a plan. We found a new place in a different city, a fresh start where no one knew our history. It wasn't an easy choice, but it felt like the right one. Packing up my old life was a bittersweet endeavor. As I sorted through my belongings, I stumbled upon old photos of Clara and me, snapshots of happier times before everything fell apart. But those memories didn't sting the way they used to. They were simply that, memories. On moving day, Lila and I loaded the last of our belongings into the truck, took one final look at the empty apartment, and hit the road. As the city faded from view in the rearview mirror, I felt an unusual mix of relief and hope. For the first time in a long while, the future felt like it was ours to shape. No Clara, no chaos, just me, Lila, and the new life we were crafting together. And that was enough. When Lila gave birth to our daughter, everything shifted. I thought I understood love and responsibility, but the moment I held that tiny bundle in my arms, the enormity of it all hit me like a tidal wave. She was perfect, delicate, squirming, and loud as could be, but undeniably perfect. Lila looked weary, her hair tousled and her eyes heavy with exhaustion. But in that moment, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. We named our daughter Ivy. It wasn't a name we had planned, but it felt like the right choice in that moment, symbolic of new beginnings, something that would grow strong and resilient despite the storms it had been born into. Parenthood was an entirely different beast. The sleepless nights, the constant barrage of diapers, and the relentless crying were enough to make anyone question their sanity. There were evenings when I'd find myself pacing the living room with Ivy cradled in my arms, trying to soothe her as she wailed for reasons I couldn't discern. Lila was in the same boat, struggling to juggle the demands of being a new mother with her own anxieties about not being good enough. "This is way tougher than I imagined," she admitted one night, her eyes shimmering with tears as Ivy let out another cry from her crib. "What if I screw her up?" I pressed a kiss to her forehead, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "We're learning as we go. You're doing an amazing job, Lila. Ivy is lucky to have you." Those early days were far from easy, but gradually we settled into a rhythm. Every little milestone, her first smile, her first laugh, felt monumental. Through the chaos, Lila and I became closer than ever. For the first time in what felt like forever, it seemed like we were truly in sync. Lila didn't just step into her role as a mother. She rediscovered herself in the process. A few months after Ivy was born, she decided to launch her own design business. Watching her throw herself into her work, seamlessly juggling client meetings alongside feedings and diaper changes, was nothing short of inspiring. She radiated confidence and determination, finally reclaiming her sense of purpose. "I didn't realize how much I missed this," she said one evening, her eyes sparkling as she showcased her latest project, a stylish redesign for a local cafe. "It feels fantastic to do something for myself again." I couldn't help but smile, soaking in the passion she exuded. "I'm really proud of you, Lila. You're absolutely thriving." Life wasn't without its challenges. We still had our fair share of disagreements and stressful moments, but it felt good. It felt authentic. With each passing day, the burdens of our past seemed to lighten a little more. Occasionally, Clara would drift through my thoughts, not with the sting of pain, but rather like a faded bruise, a reminder of what I had endured. I understood that I couldn't carry that anger forever. It was too burdensome and it no longer served me. So, one tranquil afternoon, while Ivy napped peacefully and the house was finally quiet, I made a decision. I would forgive Clara, not for her sake but for my own. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing her actions. It was about liberating myself. I didn't want to be the person who spent the rest of his life shackled by bitterness. I wanted to move forward and create something meaningful with Lila and our daughter. A few weeks after that quiet epiphany, Lila and I made a commitment to one another. Sitting on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, we watched Ivy sleep soundly in her crib inside. I took her hand in mine, intertwining our fingers. "We've been through a lot together," I said, gently squeezing her hand. Lila smiled, resting her head against my shoulder. "Yeah, we have. I don't want our past to linger over us anymore," I said. "Let's leave it all behind, for good." She lifted her gaze to meet mine, her expression soft yet resolute. "Deal." And just like that, we released the past, the anger, the resentment, the mistakes, and walked away from it. One of our favorite family activities became walking along the beach. There was something therapeutic about the ocean. The rhythmic waves and the salty air felt cleansing, washing away the remnants of our struggles. On a brisk autumn morning, we strolled hand in hand along the shore, Ivy snugly nestled in her stroller, cooing softly as the waves kissed the sand. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden hue over the water, and for the first time in ages, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. "What do you think the future has in store for us?" Lila asked, glancing at me with a playful smile. I pondered her question for a moment, then shrugged. "I don't know, but I'm looking forward to finding out." Lila chuckled softly, her fingers tightening around mine. "Same here." We continued walking in companionable silence, the only sounds being the waves crashing and the gentle squeak of the stroller wheels on the sand. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem daunting or uncertain. It felt expansive, filled with possibilities. Betrayal had once shattered my world. It had dismantled the life I thought I wanted, but it also led me to this moment, this beautiful life with Lila by my side and Ivy in my arms. As we stood there, watching the waves crash against the shore, I came to an important realization. Life isn't about dodging storms. It's about learning to dance in the rain and finding beauty in the chaos. And standing there on that beach with Lila and Ivy beside me, I knew one undeniable truth. I was exactly where I was meant to be.